Should I start?
Hold on. Yeah. Okay. So just welcome to everyone to the Bangalore Probability Seminar. So today's speaker is Manan Bhatia, who is a undergraduate student just finishing at the Indian Institute of Science, and he will be going to MIT shortly or maybe not so shortly. So today he'll speak about moderate deviation estimates in stationary last passage population. Go ahead.
Thank you for inviting me to give the talk. So we will be talking about a very specific class of random growth models. So to begin, let us think about what a very simple example of a random growth model would be. So a very simple thing which comes to mind is the following. So what you do is you start with a substrate, a flat line. So let us take that to be the integers, and on every point on the integers, you have a sequence of blocks falling, and the inter-arrival time of the blocks has some IID distribution, and there is no, I mean, the IID distribution is spatially independent also. So say on the point 1, there is a sequence of blocks falling with some IID inter-arrival times. This model is very simple, right? I mean, just by the law of large numbers, one can directly say that if you take a fixed point, say fix a point 1, then at time t, the height at that point should be, I mean, of the order t. And then by central limit theorem, you can immediately say that if you scale by the expected value, which is linear in the time, and then you divide by the fluctuations square root t, you get some sort of limiting distribution, the Gaussian distribution. So at time t, you will expect a surface of height t, and you will also expect it to be very rough. I mean, rough. Why rough? Because I mean, there is no dependence, spatial dependence, right? So suppose that while the growth was going on, suppose that the situation was like this. So what happened was that there is this point 4. This point 4 here is does not have anything, right? And the point 1 has lots of stuff. But the growth mechanism really does not take this into account at all. So it just keeps piling on stuff at both these points equally. It does not take into account that the heights need to be equalized for the surface to be more smooth. So yeah, so you will expect that the surface, I mean, is going to be very spiky. So it was realized that there's, I mean, people were interested in a sort of growth models which have a characteristic of producing surfaces which are more smooth. So which led to an interest in a class of models which I'll come to now. So basically, what sort of thing you need? I mean, among more things, but one basic thing you need is that valleys should be filled very quickly. So, like in this case, this 4 things needs to be filled very fast, and also peaks should be filled much more slowly. So we don't want this one guy to fill up very fast because that would lead to more inequality. Okay, so let us come to a model which has this kind of valley filling fast and peak filling slow characteristics. Okay, so this is the corner growth model. So let us directly go into what this model is. So yeah, so what do you start with? You start with this kind of V-shaped object at the start. This V-shaped thing is the starting thing, and there is nothing in between. So the starting thing looks like this. This is your substrate, this V-shaped object. Now growth is going to happen on that substrate. So how does the growth proceed? So well, what you do is, so to start, you wait until time W11 occurs. When that time W11 occurs, you flip this kind of valley to a peak like this. So basically, you transition from this surface to this surface. Now after that, you have a surface which looks like this, and you wait an increment of time W12, and then you flip this thing. And simultaneously, an increment of this thing is also going on, W21, and then you flip this thing to this. So basically, what happens is at time W11, this valley gets flipped to this. At time W11 plus W12, this thing will get flipped to this, and W11 plus W21 will signal the flipping of this thing to this. Okay, so this is the model. After this, you keep on doing the same things, and you will get, I mean, at time t, there will be some sort of surface which has occurred. So yeah, we'll keep switching between the notations. I mean, between saying that this peak has flipped, or we often even say that W21 got absorbed into the surface instead of saying that this valley got flipped. Right. So let us look at the time Tij, which is the absorption time of the square Wij. I mean the square the square containing W41, say, if ij equal to 4, 1. So I am saying that this recursion is satisfied. This simple recursion is satisfied by these times. And this is actually very, very easy to see. Let us look at this thing. So what I am saying here is that, I mean, say ij is 4, 2. So what does this say? What I am saying is that the time of absorbing 4, 2. To absorb 4, 2, what do you need to do? You need to flip this value. And when does this, I mean, to flip this value first, you need to create this value, right? So to create this value, you need to have absorbed W32 and W41. So first you wait the maximum of these times. Now this value has been created. And now you just need to flip this thing, and that takes an additional W42 amount of time. And then this thing is created. Okay, so this recursion is satisfied. And now, I mean, notice that in the last slide, I was talking about the property of valleys being filled quickly and peaks being filled slowly, right? So this kind of model exactly has those properties. Why? Because, I mean, assume that, I mean, think if there is a valley here, like the valley that is here, and how much time does it take to fill that? You just need to wait a W14 amount of time. That's some constant order time because everything is IID. Now, instead of looking at a valley, if you are looking at a huge peak, then to fill that peak, we would first need to create lots of valleys. I mean, 2 valleys around it, and that would take a lot of time in itself. That won't be a constant order time. Yeah, so this has that property, and yeah, this fits in this general paradigm of KPZ, where I mean, it is believed that models with very few basic properties, like the one I just said, is value filling and some other basic things, they should have the same universal behavior. So in this thing, I was saying that the last time, in the last slide, I was saying that the height is very spiky, right? So in this, it is supposed to be less spiky. So in the last model, there were fluctuations of order square root t, height fluctuations of order square root t. So here it is, I mean, believed to be generally true that the height fluctuations at time t should be of the order t raised to 1/3. And also in the last model, there was no spatial correlation. So here it's expected that the spatial correlation is present at the characteristic scale t raised to 2/3. Okay, and in the last one, there is also a central limit theorem. So actually, it's also believed that if you, in this general class of models, if you, I mean, that the microscopic details don't really matter. And if you scale by the characteristic fluctuation rate after subtracting the mean, then they should generally go to some sort of some central distribution. I mean, that's universal distribution, just like there was a Gaussian distribution in the earlier slide. Okay. So, I mean, there is another way of recasting this model, which sort of makes it, I mean, it's exactly the same, but it makes it a bit simpler to analyze. So what is this model? So you start with Z2. On each point on Z2, on each vertex on Z2 with the usual graph structure, you place IID random variables Wij. So at a point ij, there is a random variable Wij. Okay, and so we will be defining the statistic that we'll be defining is the last passage time between 2 points. So I'll tell you what that is. So you can define them between any 2 points which are ordered in a sense, and I'll come to that. I'll just first define it for points u equal to 1, 1 and v equal to r, r. Okay. So let us look at what the last passage time is from 1 to r. For that, first of all, you take all upright paths from 1 to r. So by an upright path, I mean a path or above. Okay, I mean it doesn't backtrack, it doesn't go left or down. Okay, so for any upright path, you define its weight to be the sum of all the vertices, sum of all the vertex weights it goes through. Sum of all these Wij for all vertices ij it passes through. So that's the weight of a path, an upright path. Now there are lots of upright paths from 1 to r, and you define the last passage time from 1 to r to be the maximum of all these weights of all the maximum of all these weights of all these paths. So, and the upright path which attains this maximum is called a geodesic. So under sufficiently general conditions on the vertex weights, say vertex weights are continuous and are sufficiently nice, so you will have that there only exists one such maximizing path almost surely. Right, so let us come. I mean, in the last model, in the corner growth model, we saw that there is a very simple recursion which is satisfied. It was also something like this, right? I want to finally say that these two models are equivalent. So first of all, I just established that the same recursion is satisfied here. And why is that? Well, that's why there for a very simple reason. Let's just look closely at it. You put u equal to 1 and v equal to r comma r for just for illustration, right? So what is the last passage time from 1 to r? It's the weight of the best path from 1 to r. And that best path needs to enter at either this vertex or this vertex, right? Because it's an upright path. So what you do is you just take the maximum of the passage times from 1 to this point and 1 to this point, and then you just add the weight at r. That gives you this kind of recursion which is satisfied. So to show that the corner growth model and the last passage percolation model are just the same, we have a recursion inside in the bulk. We just need to show that the boundary distributions match, and then you can just do recursively. So to show so what I need to show is that on the boundaries, the behavior of the passage time, the distribution of the passage time is the same as the distribution of the absorbance time on these boundaries. And that is actually very clear. Why? Because look at, say, a 0.41. When is this 0.41 absorbed? To absorb 41, you need to first flip this value. Then you need to flip this value. I see that someone is raising a hand. Okay, I don't know what. Do I need to do something or?
So can you please ask the question in chat if it's possible?
Okay, maybe I'll go on and then you
Yeah,
can tell.
you go. I think you
when the question comes.
Okay. So yeah, the time of absorbing W41 is to absorb W41, you first need to flip this to flip stuff on this boundary. The time of absorbing 41 is just the sum of independent exponential one random variables, as you only care about this line. And similarly, here, if you are taking a point here, say 41 point here, then the time of the last passage time from 1 to 41, that is just the sum of these exponential variables. So you can just show like this that the distribution agrees along the boundaries, and that just finishes the proof. Okay. So now we saw this last passage percolation model. So let us come to some first order behavior of this model. So right in the corner growth model, we had I roughly said that the heights should be linear, right? And then there should be fluctuations of order t raised to 1/3. But let us come to that later. But that linear growth in this setting would be something like this. You look at what the last passage time is along a specific direction, and you try to ask if there is a limiting growth rate. So basically, say you start from 1, you ask what's the last passage time from 1 to r, and then if you scale by r, does that go to some constant thing? So it turns out that under sufficiently general conditions of the distribution, that this is true. The growth rate depends on the direction. Okay, so let's see how one would prove this. I won't give a complete proof. I'll just give an rough idea.
Manan, there is a clarification asked for in the previous slide. Can you just explain? Can you just go back to the previous slide?
Yeah. So the question was about this E1 and E2. What are these?
So E1 and E2 are just the unit vectors in the coordinate direction. So E1 is the unit vector on the x-axis, and E2 is the unit vector on the y-axis. Okay. Right, so we are looking at how to prove this. So I won't give a complete proof, but I'll just say something like that. It just follows by a subadditive argument. Here superadditive. So what do I mean by that? So, well, you just look at the passage time from 1 to r plus s. So that is the weight of the best path from 1 to r plus s, right? So, if you take a path from 1 to r and join it with a path from r to r plus s, then you'll get a valid path from 1 to r plus s. So it follows that the passage time from 1 to r plus s is at least the passage time from 1 to r plus the passage time from r to r plus s. There's a slight problem because this vertex is quite counted twice, but let us not come to that. That's why I put this prime. That can be handled. So this thing is superadditive. And for superadditive sequences, say an plus m is at least an plus am. If there's a deterministic sequence like this, there is this sort of subadditive theorem, this called Feketes's lemma, which says that an by n should go to a limit. But here, everything is
sorry to interrupt. So this alpha mn This is okay. Yes, so it's already answered. So it's just alpha times m comma n. That is, so it's just multiplied by alpha. That
Yeah,
was
it's just multiplied. So I'm dividing by alpha. It's it's the. Mhm.
yeah. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Yeah, so there is. I told you how to do this. If everything was deterministic, but there is sort of a random variable version of Euclid's lemma, and that goes by Kingman's theorem. So there is some more detail in that, but it can be handled by that result. So yeah, let us not say more about that. Okay, so we know that in each direction there has to be characteristic growth rate, but we don't really know anything about this growth rate, right? I mean, how does it behave with m comma n? And actually, nothing much is known for the case of completely general distributions. But if you put some very specific distributions, for instance, if you put the distribution exponential 1 for each vertex weight, then actually you can say a lot. And let's come to that. Okay, so now each vertex in Z2 has an exponential 1 random variable, everything independent, and we are just doing the last passage population thing. Okay, so actually in this case, a lot is known. So in 1999, it was shown that if you, the entire distribution function of the passage time can actually be written explicitly. And here I've restricted to m greater than equal to n, but that is not a real restriction because you have symmetry about the x equal to y line, right? Okay, so there is this complicated formula present, which gives you the distribution. I'll say a few words about that, but nothing much. So how is this formula established? I'll not say it very properly, but I mean, it uses the RSA correspondence between pairs of Young tableau and generalized permutations. So basically, when for first it says this kind of formula established for geometric random variable, and then you take the limit, you get exponential. So sort of in the last passage problem, you are taking the best upright path, right, between any 2 points. So that thing actually translates to taking the longest increasing subsequence of a generalized permutation, and when you push forward the measures to the permutation case and then subsequently to the Young tableau case, you can handle it by using combinatorial techniques. Yeah, I won't say much about that, but one thing that we can realize is that, I mean, in the theory of random matrices, it is known that if X is an ID standard complex Gaussian matrix and you consider this Wishart matrix X star X, and you look at its joint density of eigenvalues, then it has this kind of formula. Right, and now you have this exact density here, and you are integrating over the region 0, t raised to n. So that means you are integrating over the space where all eigenvalues are smaller than t. So this immediately tells you that the distribution of GMN is it's the same as the distribution of the largest eigenvalue of this kind of Wishart matrix. Okay, so actually a lot of stuff is known about this, about how this largest eigenvalue behaves and concentrates in the random matrix literature, and that can be translated into this setting also. Okay, so all that stuff is here, but before doing that, let us come to what the limiting shape looks like if in the case of exponential last passage population. I mean, recall that I said that there is a limiting behavior in each direction for general vertex weights, I mean sufficiently general vertex weights, but in exponential case you have an exact formula, right? So by analyzing that formula you can show that the shape function looks like this.
The question. So this ZMN, you did not explain what it was in the previous formula.
In the previous slide?
Yeah, in the previous slide. So you did not explain what exactly is this ZMN. This equation of Johansson's formula.
Oh, that is, I mean, that's a normalization type of thing, right? So you want to make it 1. So you say integrate with 0, infinity, because the eigenvalues can maximum be infinity. So it will be integral 0, infinity raised to n, I think, and this integral, your integral. That's just to normalize this thing to be 1.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Right, so for exponential last passage population, this is the limit shape. And I was talking about an n raised to 1/3 scaling, right? So here you have an exact formula, and you can actually analyze that formula to show that kpz n raised to 1/3 fluctuation rate can be, I mean, to establish that exactly in this setting. So if you scale gn by its expected value, I mean, by this thing, by the limit shape. So if you put m equal to n, you will get 4n. and then you scale by n raised to 1/3, you can show that it converges to a universal object from random matrix theory, the G-Tracy-Widom distribution. Okay, so now come to, I said that there is a correspondence with random matrices, right, of the passage time. So I said that there are good estimates known in the random matrix literature, and you can obtain estimates for the passage time using those. So yeah, so these are those estimates. So what do these say? So this is the upper tail estimate. So what is the probability that Gn is sufficiently larger than its mean? Well, the scale is n raised to 1/3, so that's why you have it here. So this probability has an upper tail of e raised to minus y raised to 3/2. And similarly, a lower bound is known for that. And for the lower tail is much lighter actually. The lower tail is e raised to minus y cube. And it is actually quite intuitive why the lower tail is lighter. I mean, if you look at the passage time, what are you doing? You are basically taking a maximum over all upright paths, right? So if you want the passage time to become larger than its mean, only one of the paths needs to do something deviant. I mean, only one of the paths need to become very large. But if you want it to become smaller, then simultaneously each and every one of the 4:1 paths in the x equal to y line need to become deviant. So that sort of gives you that this is much more unlikely to occur than this thing. And the corresponding lower bound was not known here, but a recent result shows that this lower bound is also true. Okay, so these are all, both these estimates are actually optimal in the exponent. Why is that? I mean, I said here that the limiting distribution is the G-Tracy-Widom thing, right? And for that, you can actually do an explicit computation. So in the limit, you know that these exponents of y raised to 3/2 and y cube are the correct ones. And this kind of gives you a finite n result for the same thing. And also here I've taken estimates along the line x equal to y, right? Well, that's not really required. You can do it in all directions, but sort of to get uniformity in your estimates. I mean, sort of get a uniform constants for all directions. You coordinate directions E1 and E2. So as long as you are away from them in angle, then these things just go fine. Okay. Right. So I showed you the point-to-point estimates. But actually, that's just one statistic, right? I mean, we defined a model where there was point-to-point lines, point-to-point passage times, but there was also a geodesic, the best path. So you could also ask about the geometry of the best path. So that is something that has been studied, and I will first give you some results about that before proving a very small thing about that. I want to illustrate how the point-to-point passage time, just the passage time estimates, can actually tell you stuff about the geometry of the entire path. Okay, so let A alpha be the event that the geodesic from 1 to 1,1 to n, that stays in a width alpha about the central line. So you want to find out how much does it deviate from being completely straight in the Euclidean sense. Okay, so it was first shown that the correct scale to look at is n raised to 2/3. I mean, the correct scale for this problem. So the typical behavior of the fluctuations about the line are of the order n raised to 2/3. That's what this thing says. And now then, this was in 1999, and then more recent results in 2016 and 18 give you bounds at the correct scale. So what does this say? This says that the probability that your transversal fluctuation is at least r at the correct scale, that is bounded by e raised to minus r cube, and this gives you a corresponding lower bound. Okay. So we'll just give a proof of a very small thing, not the complete results at the back. So what will we prove? We'll just show that if you, so we are looking at a geodesic from 1 to n, right? We are saying that if you have point px here, if it is far, then the probability of your geodesic hitting exactly px is small, and we'll give a quantitative e raised to minus r cube type thing which you saw in the last slide. So how do you do that? Well, when does the geodesic pass through px? For that to happen, the passage time from 1 to px plus the passage time from px to n, that thing should be equal to the entire passage time from 1 to n, right? That's when the geodesic will go through there. I mean, you can just use the almost show uniqueness of the geodesic. Okay, so we need to first analyze what the expected passage time from 1 to px plus the expected passage time from px to n is. So now, but we want to analyze this kind of thing, but we already know the limit shape for exponential last passage population, right? We know that the limit thing is square root n plus square root n square if you are going from 0 to m comma n. So you just do a Taylor expansion sort of calculation of that, and then you see that there is a quadratic fallen mean. I mean, if you are going a distance x, then you expect to lose x square by n, cx square by n in your mean. Okay, so we said that the KPZ thing predicts that we know here that the fluctuation rate is from 1 to n is n raised to 1/3. So sort of intuitively, if you want to look at typical transversal fluctuations, you will want that the fall in mean here exactly balances this fluctuation order. So I mean, if you just equate x square over n to n raised to 1/3, you see that the typical fluctuation rate should be n raised to 2/3. Okay, but this is not rigorous. So let us give a rigorous bound of something, right? So I will use this notation for this talk and the next talk. So if I'm going to rescale anything, I'll just put a tilde over it. So g tilde n is the rescaled passage time from 1 to n. So I want to bound the probability that the geodesic passes through px, and I know that the scale, intuitively I know that the scale is n raised to 2/3. So I'll add x equal to rn raised to 2/3. So I'm looking at the probability that the sum of passage time from 1 to px plus the passage time from px to n, that is exactly equal to the passage time from 1 to n. I know that this thing has a mean x square by n less than gn, and x square by n is now r square n raised to 1/3. So basically, for them to be equal, either this whole quantity needs to overshoot its mean, or this whole quantity needs to undershoot its mean, right? So either this path should overshoot its mean at the scale r square n raised to 1/3, or this part should overshoot its mean at the same thing, or either this whole path should undershoot its mean. So you just write this down by a straightforward union bound, and then you already know the point-to-point passage time estimates, right? We did them just now. I mean, this is the upper point-to-point tail. So for this, we know y raised to 3/2 upper bound. So you just put r square, you get r square raised to 3/2, you get an r cube, and in the lower tail, you know a y cube upper bound. So you just put this kind of thing, r square cube, so that's e raised to minus r6. Okay, so you get this kind of thing here. Okay, so we just obtained it for a point, but you can actually use this kind of technique only to get the better results also, but there's some more technical stuff that is required, and it sort of, there you had the point-to-point estimates, but you need to sort of get point-to-line segment estimates to get that sort of thing. But I'll come to that in the next talk that has stuff which requires this more. Okay. So basically, what did we see until now? So we saw the corner growth model and we saw the last passage population model. So in the corner growth model, what is happening? There is growth happening in a Markovian manner. So if you start with the surface, then you make a new surface from it in a Markovian manner, right? So there is a correspondence of the corner growth model and hence the last passage population model with the interacting particle system kind of process known as a TASEP. So I'll tell you that correspondence now, and at the end of the correspondence, we'll see that since the stationary, since the state space of the TASEP is much more simpler to think about than the state space of the last passage population thing, you can look at what initial conditions you should start from in the last passage setting. You can infer that from the TASEP. Okay, so this was just some vague thing, but let us not think about that more. Let us go directly into what the TASEP is. Okay, so its full form is a totally asymmetric exclusion process. And what is the process exactly? So basically, you start with the configuration of particles and holes on the line, on the integers. I just do z+half for convenience later on. So what is this? So each vertex on z+half, you give that an IID exponential 1 clock. Okay, and whenever that clock rings, if there is a vertex, if there is a particle on that vertex, then that particle is given an indication to move to its right. And that particle jumps to its right only if there is a hole to the right of the particle. If there is another particle, then that particle cannot jump to its right. So using this, you can construct a process, and using these dynamics, this process is called the TASEP. Okay, so as I said, there is a very intimate relation between the TASEP and the last passage population model. So let us exactly come to that. Okay, so I will tell you how to make the exponential last passage population model using the TASEP. Right. So you first, I mean, this is the TASF. What have I done? This is the point 0, and these vertices and holes are placed on the line z plus half. So these black dots are the particles, and these white dots are the holes. So basically, to the left of 0, you have all particles, and to the right of 0, you have all holes right now. So it's the step initial condition. This is called the step initial condition of the TASF. Right. So now you place your V-shaped thing like this, and I'll tell you how the growth occurs. So basically, once this particle jumps to the right, you just flip this thing. This value gets flipped to a peak as soon as this guy jumps to the right. Now what happens is there's a particle here, a hole here, a particle here, and a hole here. That means 2 valleys here. And when this jump happens, you flip this valley. And when this jump happens, you flip this valley. And you keep going onward, and you obtain a similar photo as the corner growth model. Okay. I want to show that this is the same as the last passage, exponential last passage thing. And how will I do that? Well, I will just do the same technique. So to show that this is the same, I mean, you can check that you only need to show the equality of this distribution. What you need to show is that the joint distribution of the mth particle to the left jumping n steps to the right is the same as the last passage time gmn. Okay, so to show that, first we just show that the these jumping times satisfy the same recursion, and that is very, very simple actually. Why is that simple? Basically, I mean, when does the particle, mth particle to the left, make a jump n steps to the right? So for that to happen, first of all, the m-1th particle has to have jumped n steps to the right. Also, the mth particle has to have jumped n-1 steps to the right. So that sort of gives you this thing. And then you have to make a final jump interchanging the mth particle, giving the mth particle the nth jump. And once you do this, you have jumped n steps to the right. So this is the same recursion as was satisfied in the corner growth model and the last passage population. And to just finish the proof, you have to show that the stuff agrees on the boundaries. And that is actually really simple, because if you look at how this particle behaves, he never has a particle on its right, right? So he just takes exponential 1 jumps. I mean, his interjumping times are exponential 1 IID variables. So this agrees with what you see in the last passage study. Okay, so we saw this correspondence in the step initial condition. Well, what I want, one thing I want to say is that here I started with this Bally type substrate, right? Correspondence actually goes further. Here you do not really just need to start with the Bally type substrate to do with the TASF, because here we started with all particles and all holes. Actually, for any initial condition of the TASF, there is a corresponding last passage population model. And how does that go? Well, you start with a point, and whenever you see a particle, you make a substrate grow in the bi-direction. So here there are lots of particles. You start here, you put lots of y increments. Here there are lots of holes. So you start here, you put lots of x-axis things. So with any initial condition of the TASF, you have a corresponding last passage population model growing from that corresponding substrate. Okay, so in the corner growth thing, I mean, before the corner growth thing, when we started, we were doing growth on a flat substrate, right? So we sort of want to think about what the corresponding thing would be here. I mean, if you, instead of starting with a valley-shaped substrate, what if we start with a flat thing? How do you make a flat thing? Well, you just keep interchanging particles and holes. Put a particle, then put a hole. Then put a particle, then put a hole. So this kind of thing will become flat instead of valley. Right, so that is called the flat initial condition. And what is that? So yeah, you start with that particle hole kind of interchanging thing. The initial distribution of the TASF is this kind of thing instead of all particles and all holes. So I won't go into that, but if you do a corresponding last passage population model, if you do the full thing, what you get is that the corresponding thing is you have a line here, and instead of looking just at the point-to-point passage times from this point to this, you actually look at the line-to-point passage times. So you are maximizing over all upright paths from this line to this point. That is the point-to-line passage time from this line to this point. Right, and we had said earlier that there is this correspondence, random matrix correspondence for the largest with linear matrix correspondence for the point-to-point passage time, but actually it goes forward for the point-to-line passage time as well. I won't really go into this, but instead of taking a complex Wishart matrix, if you take a real Wishart matrix, you get a correspondence with the eigenvalues of that. Okay, So we saw the flat initial condition. Another intuitive initial condition one could think about would be to start with the stationary initial condition of the TASEP. Okay, so it is known that the stationary initial conditions of the TASEP are this. What is this? Basically, on each side, you put a particle with probability rho, and then you do this independently. So on each side is a particle or a hole, particle with probability rho, hole with probability 1 minus rho, independent. So this is the stationary. I mean, these are the extremal stationary measures for the TASEP. They can be more, which are superpositions of these, but these are the extremal ones. Okay, so if you do the corresponding last passage percolation picture, right, what would you see? I said that whenever you see a particle, you make a y-axis jump, and whenever you see a hole, you do a x-axis jump in the substrate, in the beginning substrate. So you have rho particles, rho is to 1 minus rho particle to rho to hole density. So your substrate would sort of have rho number, rho is to 1 minus rho ratio of vertical to horizontal jumps, and that will tell you that it is some random thing. I mean, about this deterministic line with some sort of Brownian type fluctuations. Okay, so that's the substrate you're starting from. Now, if I modify if instead of starting the TASEP from exactly the stationary initial condition, if I modify it just a little bit, then I can actually have a very nice description of it in terms of another last passage percolation model, and that is much easier to analyze actually. So let's come to that. Okay, so instead of starting with the stationary initial condition, you start with this. On the TASEP, you put a particle at 0, not at 0, particle just to the right of 0, a hole just to the left at 0, and everywhere else you do the same stationary initial condition kind of thing. You put Bernoulli rho particle hole independent. Okay, so now I'm saying that this TASEP corresponds to this kind of last passage percolation model. And what is this last passage percolation model? Well, on inside, in the bulk, you have exponential 1 weights on the vertices. On the x-axis, instead of exponential 1, you have exponential 1 minus rho weights. On the y-axis, you have exponential rho weights, and on 0, you have no weight at all. So you are basically computing passage time from 0 to a point, and with these weights. Okay. So now, see, recall, I mean, even here the same recursion will be satisfied, right? Because the bulk weights are just the same. So to show any kind of distributional, any kind of equality, I'll come to that in the next page. We'll have to analyze the boundaries. And the boundaries will correspond to the motion of the particle P0 and the hole H0. By symmetry, let's just look at how the particle P0 jumps in the TASEP from this initial condition. Right. So if you look at particle 0 and look at what it sees to its right, it sees lots of particles and holes. But what you can do is you can look at all the particles as servers and all the holes as customers. So you'll see sort of, I mean, this particle will start serving customers, and then the customer will exit, will pass through it. Okay, so you know the stationary, I mean, you know this Bernoulli rho thing, right? So inside, so between the gap of particle P0 and particle P minus 1, you will be seeing sort of a geometric row number of customers. And actually, there is this result in the, for Qs in tandem. I mean, there it's like if you have a bird dead process with an, in which stuff is entering at rho, then at intensity rho, then it will also exit at intensity rho in the stationary, when everything is stationary, and inside there will be sort of a geometric kind of number of customers in the system. Okay, so I won't get into that, but properly, but that immediately tells you that the jumps of this particle P0 are actually according to a Poisson process of jump rate 1 minus rho. I mean, this 1 minus rho thing is the sort of density of holes. Okay, so we know how the particle P0 behaves, and similarly, hole H0 will go to the left with jumps of according to Poisson process of density of intensity rho. Okay, so to show the correspondence, I am going to show this. So basically, if I look at the nth particle to the left of 0 and look at the time it crosses the mth hole to the right of 0, I am saying that it is distributed according to the passage time in this model. Okay, and why is that? Well, I said that the recursion is the same inside, and to show the equality, I have to do the boundary things. here I saw that this particle jumps with increments of Bernoulli, increments of exponential 1 minus rho. So this, and here if you look, I mean, if you look at the x-axis, you see that the last passage times along the x-axis are actually exactly exponential 1 minus rho. I mean, the increments are exactly exponential 1 minus rho. And the y-axis, they're exponential rho, which corresponds to the motion of this hole. After this, and using the recursion, you get that the two models are the same. Okay, so we have shown this. Now, so yeah, we just saw the exponential, the stationary last passage percolation model, right? What was there? There was an exponential 1 minus rho weights here, exponential rho weights here, and exponential 1 in the bulk. Now I ask this question, say I have a point very close to this axis, the coordinate axis, x coordinate axis. I'm looking at the geodesic from 0 to that point. Now, well, these exponential 1 minus rho weights are much bigger than the bulk exponential weights, right? So you would sort of intuitively expect that the geodesic should spend a lot of time on this coordinate axis before exiting and going to that point. Why? Because these points will give him a lot of weight. I mean, the geodesic also wants to maximize its weight. And similarly, if there is a point here and you are looking at the geodesic from 0 to that point, you would expect that the geodesic will stay a long time here. So sort of there are these two competing forces, one trying to pull you away to the x coordinate axis and one trying to pull you away to the y coordinate axis. Now, intuitively, it makes sense that there is a line. I mean, if you are looking at geodesics from 0 to any point on that line, you would sort of intuitively expect that the geodesic does not spend any macroscopic amount of time on any of the axes because the forces are just completely balanced out. So this sort of direction is called a characteristic direction, and for a given density rho of the stationary model, this happens along this direction. And why does this happen along this direction? I mean, figuring that out rigorously will come to that in the next talk, but intuitively it's quite easy to understand actually. Why? Okay, so let θ1, θ2, let this be our candidate for the characteristic direction. What must the characteristic direction satisfy? So suppose this point is θ1, θ2, and the geodesic is macroscopically exiting at the exit with an exit happening at a point x, 0. So this length is x. Right, so let us look at how much weight does the geodesic accumulates. Well, it accumulates around x over 1 minus rho here because the weights on this axis are exponential 1 minus rho. And how much does the geodesic accumulate while going from here to here? Well, now the geodesic is completely in the bulk. So it does not really relate to the boundaries at all once the exit happens, and it's completely in the exponential 1 environment. So actually, I mean, for that, in the exponential last passage percolation, we already exactly know the limit shape, right? We know the last passage times behave in first order according to square root m plus square root n whole square. And now you are exactly in the bulk. So you can just use that formula. You have followed a distance x here. So the distance here remaining is θ2 and the horizontal distance remaining is θ1 minus x. You just write this thing out. Now you want θ1, θ2 to be such that this thing is maximized at x equal to 0. And when you just do some calculus, you see that it works out for θ1, θ2 to be in this direction. Okay, so we know that intuitively know that the exit happens right at the origin in this characteristic direction. So the next talk will actually be about this. So basically, to set up the stage for the next talk, I'll just introduce a bit of notation. So what is Vn? Vn is a generic point in the characteristic direction. I just put it here in the direction x equal to y just for, making the drawing easier. But Vn is any point in the characteristic direction. And if you are going in that direction, so say this is a geodesic from 0 to Vn, that geodesic has to exit the boundary at some point, right? So if it exits along the x-axis, if it exits at this point, I define the exit time to be the x coordinate, and if it exits in the y direction, I define the exit time to be the minus of the y coordinate. So basically, exits along the x direction are positive and exits along the y direction are negative. And that's sort of the notation. And in the next talk, we'll see stuff about this. So we will show that in the direction of in the characteristic direction, I mean, we know that by intuitive reasoning, we know that the macroscopic exit happens at 0, but we'll show that it actually fluctuates at the scale n raised to 2/3, and then we'll proceed to deriving deviation estimates for the exit time at this scale. So yeah, this is what I wanted to say. Thanks. Yeah, so if there are any questions, I mean, I can.
Yeah. There is one question in the chat. Do you see, Manan?
Yeah. So the question is, this is the exit the last contact time?
The best, I mean, the best path from 0 to Vn, that will, yeah, exactly. It will contact the coordinate axis at some point, right? I mean, it will leave the coordinate axis at some x coordinate or y coordinate. So exit is just the corresponding x coordinate or y coordinate, and with the convention being that y coordinates are taken to be negative and the x coordinates are taken to be positive. So like in this photo, the exit would be -1. In this photo, the exit would be +3.
Okay, Manan, continue.
So yeah, as we said at the end of the last talk, we'll be looking at this object Zn. So what is Zn? So recall that in last talk we defined the characteristic direction. So the characteristic direction was a direction along. I mean, if you take a point from 0, I mean, if you look at the last passage time from 0 to a point Vn, a generic point in the characteristic direction, then that thing should have macroscopically 0 exit time. What that I mean? I mean, the geodesic should have 0 exit time. And what I mean by that is basically if you look at the geodesic from 0 to Vn, then I mean it's an upright path, right? It has to leave this kind of coordinate axis, this kind of coordinate axis at some point. So if you take this geodesic from 0 to Vn, then it leaves the coordinate axis at this point. So the exit time here is 3. I recall it leaves at the point x equal to 3. Here it leaves at the point y equal to 1. So I call the exit time -1. So it's basically just the point of the geodesic leaving the coordinate axis, with the convention being that uh, the exit time is positive if you leave on the x direction, and if you leave in the y direction, the exit time is negative. So that was the exit time. Okay, so this was just for recalling, and now we want to, I mean, as we promised in the last talk, we want to say that the exit time, if you are going in the characteristic direction, and the exit time is fluctuating at the scale n raised to 2/3, and we know that it is sublinear because it's macroscopically happening at 0, right? The exit. So now we show that the scale is n raised to 2/3. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, recall the definition of Vn. Vn was the generic point in the characteristic direction. How had we found the characteristic direction? We had done just some calculus on this sort of object, which took into account the geodesic leaving the x-axis at the point x, and then we just did a mean calculation. Okay, so now let us just do a sort of better version of this. So what do we do? So you are looking, I mean, so θ1, θ2, you take θ1, θ2 to be the vector along the characteristic direction, and we are trying to look at how much you lose by going by having an exit time of x. So basically, I mean, so if you have a path with exit time x, then it is going to gain 1 over 1 minus rho for each exponential weight on the x-axis. So total weight with exit time x, say x is positive, is this. And then this part comes from the bulk, as we had seen earlier. So now you can just do a Taylor expansion here in x, right? I mean, notice that this is exactly parallel to what was going on in the transversal fluctuation argument. We want to show that the exit time is not too large. So we'll show that if the exit time is large, then you lose a lot. Then you lose a lot of weight. So in the first step for that, you have to first calculate the weight if you, I mean, the expected weight if you have an exit time of x. So you just do this calculation, you do a Taylor expansion, and you observe this sort of thing. So this n would be the last passage time in this direction, right? Recall square root m plus square root n whole square for the exponential last passage population model. So this n is that thing for this point Vn. If you do square root m plus square root n whole square for this coordinate, you get n. And there is a quadratic fall in mean, just as in the transversal fluctuation setting. So right, I have written here rho equal to half, but everything right now except a specific thing at the very end of the talk will go forth for all rho. Right. So right now this restriction to rho equal to half is for convenience and for ease in drawing figures and explaining. So basically for rho equal to half, this thing just becomes 1, and you have a quadratic fall in mean by looking at a path with exit time x. So again, for typical exit times, you sort of heuristically expect that the fall in mean should be balanced by the KPZ class fluctuation n is to 1 over 3. When you do this kind of calculation, you immediately get x should be of the order n is to 2/3, and this is sort of a heuristic very similar to the one we saw in for the transversal fluctuations. Okay, but this is not any sort of proof. Okay, so before going into some proof, let me tell you more about what is known for the exit time. Okay, so we intuitively know that the scale is n is to 2/3. So in 2006, it was shown that the upper tails of the exit time, they have at least a power law tail. So the probability that the exit time is at least r when in the suitable scaling, that is 1 over r cube. And then this was upgraded subsequently recently to, I mean, the upper tail was upgraded to e raised to minus r square. And then it was shown that there is a corresponding lower tail of e raised to minus r cube. Here there is upper tail of square and a lower tail of cube. So optimal exponent has to lie somewhere in between. Okay, so before coming to that, let me also just say a few words about not the upper tail, instead the lower tail. So what is the probability of the exit time being very, very small in the correct scaling? So this is a very recent result actually. Here I've written in 2019 because it was in the same paper, but this is, I mean, this revision happened just a month ago. So they give this sort of upper bound, and I mean the expected correct upper bound is delta. I mean that this log factor should not there, but this should not be there. But this is the best known till now, and this result is actually not known currently. I mean it is available in sort of an average format, suitable averaging. I mean in this paper, but it's this is actually not really known right now. Okay, so this was for the lower tail, and we'll not talk about it more in the talk, but we'll focus on the upper tail. So as I said, the best known upper bound was this, and the corresponding the best known upper bound was this, and now in what we tell you in this talk, then to e raised to minus r cube. This was two independent works. One was done by us, and then this the other independent was done independently by this group. Okay, so I am going to show a result which says the probability that the exit time is larger than r in the correct scaling is at most e raised to minus r. So the basic proof that the transversal fluctuations thing, and there I said that to get good results, you cannot just do with the point-to-point estimates, right? So to explain it here, I will have to tell you what the technical estimates are. So recall this was the kind of point-to-point estimates, right? You were looking at the passage time from 1 to n, and you were saying what is the probability of it overshooting its mean by x in the scale suitable scaling. So that was the e raised to minus x raised to 3/2. Okay, so to get better results, you needed some estimate like this actually. So what does this do? I mean, instead of just looking at the point-to-point passage times, you sort of look at the line segment to line segment passage times. I mean, you are looking at the best path which goes from this line segment of which n raised to 2/3 to this line segment of n raised to 2/3. You are simultaneously trying to control all paths. And why this n raised to 2/3? I mean, recall I was saying in that KPZ kind of thing, right? That the spatial correlations are supposed to be of the order n raised to 2/3, and you sort of expect a limiting shape at that scale. So this relates to that, and actually you can. This was done in 2016 in this work, and you can show that simultaneously that the probability that any path from A to B is larger than 4n by x, that probability is simultaneously bounded by this e raised to minus x raised to 3/2. And again, as we saw earlier in the point-to-point estimates, this thing kind of works for all directions, not just 4n. I mean, to get uniform estimates, you have to restrict to keeping all your directions away from your boundary. As long as you are working in directions away from the coordinate directions u1 and e2, you get bounds with uniform bounds. Okay, so this was a technical ingredient that will go into the proof. So now let's just jump straight into the upper tail for the exit time. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to restrict to rho equal to half to make figures better, but for this, at this point, you don't really need rho equal to half. Okay, so what do I need to bound? I need to bound this sort of thing. Okay, so first of all, I mean, I won't prove this part, but I just dispense with the case of the exit time being too large. I mean, if R is really large, I mean, if R is this kind of thing, R is more than this kind of thing, then when you plug R here, you see that the exit time sorry, you see that the exit time is at least 1 minus epsilon n by 2. I mean, that is something here where this part is epsilon. I mean, we saw that there is a quadratic fall in mean, right? And that's told us that the fluctuation order should be n raised to 2/3. But if you have exit time so large, then the mean, your mean will be, I mean, it won't be n at all. The mean from here to here is supposed to be n. But if your exit time of a path is so high, then you will expect that its weight is like really small. I mean, not n raised to 1/3 fluctuation, but something, I mean, you will fall by, say, n by 2 or something like that. So actually, this part is very easy to handle. The case where the exit time is really big. Oh, I think there's a typo here. This thing should be 1 minus epsilon n by 2. Yeah, sorry for that. R should be like this. Okay, so the case of exit time being really large, I mean, when R is bigger than that, we just dispense. You don't do it, it's very easy to do, and yeah. So we just handle the case when R is between here. So to do that, we'll do it in this kind of way. We'll say that we'll ask what is the probability that the exit time, that the exit happens in between an interval of width n raised to 2/3. So that is what we will ask, and then we'll get a good bound for this. We'll get an e raised to minus r cube bound for this, and then we'll sort of just take a union bound and just sum up over all r. And then the probability that the exit happens after r is small. Okay. Right. So let us see how you prove this kind of thing. Yeah. So let us set up some notation first to simplify stuff. What is WR? WR is this point Rn raised to 2 over 3 comma 0. It is this point. And by the mean calculation, one very similar to the transversal fluctuation calculation, we know that if you have in between WR and WR plus 1, that is the point here, and you look at the expected length of a expected weight of a path which goes from 0 to Vn and exits inside. We know by that calculation that that thing should have a fall in mean of order r square n is to 1/3. Why r square? I mean, we had an x square over n. If you do x square over n here, you get r square n is to 1/3. And just notice what this is. I mean, if you have a path going from 0 to x and x to Vn, then you are calculating the first contribution to the weight is from the boundary. You are going from 0 to x. So that is this term. And then after that, you are completely in the bulk, right? So you are in the exponential last passage scenario, not the stationary one. So you are taking the weight from just above x to Vn. I just write it x to Vn. And yeah, that's this weight. So this is the total weight of a path. Okay. So I have to bound this kind of probability that the exit time happens in between here. And when will that happen? Well, that will happen when the almost short uniqueness of geodesics. That will only happen if the best path exiting inside matches the overall best path. Just the same thing as we did in the transversal fluctuation argument. That will happen when these two things are equal. But I mean, notice by the above thing that this thing has a fall in mean. This thing is lesser than the mean of this thing by r square n is to 1/3. Right. Oh, okay. Right here, this would be a G stat. Sorry for that. Okay, so either this thing should go below n by r square n raised to 1/3, or this thing should somehow go above. This thing should go above its mean n minus r square n raised to 1/3 by r square n raised to 1/3. Just the same calculation as we did there, straightforward union bound. So you sort of like write it like this. Well, this term is going to be really small. I'll tell it to. I'll tell you about it in a moment. Now let us just focus on this term first. This is really, really small. It's not going to be e raised to minus r cube also. Actually, it's going to be e raised to minus r raised to 6. So if you look at this term, you're asking the probability that this maximum is large, right? So, well, you can just upper bound it by the probability that both of these things are large by themselves. Both these maxima are large by themselves. And I mean, recall this notation of G tilde. By G tilde of a quantity, I meant that quantity minus its expectation. So basically, if this maximum is large, it's upper bounded by the probability that when you scale this thing, it is also large. Right? So but just by a straightforward union bound, you get this sort of thing. And now notice notice one thing, this thing, I mean, look at this term. What is this term? Well, basically you are taking the maximum where x is situated in this interval, right? So you are taking the maximum of the exponential last passage per time from this interval to Vn. Okay, and at this point, recall the parallelogram estimate, this kind of thing. Here you had an interval of with n raised to 2/3, and you were bounding the passage time. I mean, you had estimates for the passage time from this side to this side. Now I'm saying is that what we will require is the degenerate case where, I mean, this side is just a point. You can just get it from this thing itself. This is much stronger. Right. So here, this is the corresponding side of with n raised to 2/3. And instead of parallelogram, you are just maximizing the passage time from this line segment to this point. So there you had a parallelogram like this. Now you don't have parallelogram. It becomes even easier, right? And now notice that we had already said that we have a separate argument, very simple argument for the large deviation thing, right? So you can restrict the slopes of the slopes of these lines are not going to be very close to either vertical or horizontal. So this is exactly in the setting of that parallelogram estimate. So you can just exactly use that. That gives you an e raised to minus y raised to 3 half bound for your upper tail, and when you plug in r square into that, you get e raised to minus r cube. So this part comes directly from that. Now this part is remaining, which I'll tell you about. But first, let us do what we left out. This part. We have to bound this. I have not put it here, right? I told you there's an e raised to minus r raised to 6 upper bound for that. Okay, and this is actually really simple. Why? I mean, you just use a very simple observation. You look at the stationary passage time. I mean the passage time from 0 to Vn. Okay, so I am saying that this is deterministically larger than the passage time from 1 to Vn, from 1, 1 to Vn. That is very obvious because of the super additivity kind of thing. And now, if you are going from 1 to Vn, you don't have any impact of the boundary weights at all, right? It's just in the bulk. So it's just the exponential last passage population time. And we already have moderate deviation lower bound estimates for the exponential last passage time through Vn, right? So you just, I mean, with this deterministic lower bound, you can just use those estimates. So basically, you had an e raised to minus y cube estimate there, right? So here you have r square, and r square's cube is r raised to 6. You get an e raised to minus r raised to 6 estimate. Okay, so this term is now dispensed with. The final term that is remaining is this term. And this term is also actually very simple. What is this term? I mean, this is just a random walk kind of estimate. Why? Because you are taking the stationary passage time to x. And what is x? X is a point in here, right? In this n raised to 2/3 length interval. So, and the passage time from 0 to x is just a random walk. I mean, you are just taking sums of IID exponential 1 minus through random variables. So what you are asking is just the probability that the maximum of a random walk in a suitable interval is larger than this. And how many weights do you have? I mean, how many weights are you summing typically on that random walk? Well, for a point x here, we have sort of r n raised to 2/3 many weights. So if you take the standard deviation of that random walk, it is r n square root r n raised to 1/3. So once you scale this by the standard deviation, you sort of want to get this kind of estimate. I mean, recall that here there was a bar. So this includes the subtracting of the mean of the random walk. So here you have this kind of mean term of the random walk, right? Because mean omega r is r n raised to 2/3, and each of the random variables on this side are exponential half. So this thing is 2. I mean, 1/2 is 2. And I subtract, and I have divided by the standard deviation term. So then this is just kind of some central limit kind of estimate. But yeah, you can get it by just doing an exponential moment generating function calculation. Once you do that, you get some Gaussian kind of tail, which gives you e raised to minus this thing square, that is e raised to minus r cube. So yeah, combining this term is e raised to minus r cube, this term is e raised to minus r cube, this term is the very small e raised to minus r raised to 6. And so yeah, this finishes the proof of the upper bound for the exit time. Okay, so we saw this now. Now we come to, I mean, we have seen estimates for the tails exponential last passage population, right? But here, I mean, we have a different model. So one could ask if similar estimates hold even here in the stationary model. I mean, similar moderate deviation estimates if they hold here. Right. So now we will go for giving good bounds for them, just as we stated the point-to-point estimates for the exponential last passage population. So before going to that, I will just first recall whatever we did for the exponential last passage thing. I'll just go over it fast. Okay, so we have seen this earlier from the random matrix correspondence. We know this kind of upper bound estimates with exponent y raised to 3/2 and lower bound estimates with exponent y raised to 3. Okay, and yeah. So one thing I would like to point out is that this estimate, which was derived recently, it was derived in the in the random matrix setting. So they didn't just do it for the specific random matrix associated to Gn. They did it in the general setting of beta ensembles, and actually the real Wishart matrix that also comes in this setting. Okay, so their technique just immediately gives you this thing also. So recall what was GL. GL was the line to point passage time from x plus y equal to 0 to m comma n. I mean, recall that we thought about it from the flat initial condition in the tacit. Okay, and this is just shorthand. So I'm just saying that you have this kind of estimate which says that the probability that your line to point passage time is much smaller than typical, that also has a lower bound. Okay, so this thing will kind of be important at the end. That's why I am focusing on it here. So now let us focus on the upper tail estimates. We are done with the exit time, and now we want to find moderate deviation upper tail estimates for the stationary last passage time. Okay, so this is the result that we are going to prove. Well, one part of the result is very, very obvious. We actually did it earlier implicitly in the proof. And what is that part? Well, again, you have this kind of explicit, deterministic thing, right? The stationary passage time from 0 to Vn is at least the exponential passage time from 1 to Vn. So that will immediately give you this lower bound. I mean, you already know good lower bounds good estimates for exponential last passage population. You use them, you get this lower bound immediately. So now you come to the upper one, which is harder than this, but not very hard. Okay, again, let's focus on rho equal to half. Purely for convenience, the proof just goes forth for other stuff, for other row. Okay, so what do I need to bound? I need to look at the probability that this geodesic is bigger, right? So what is the geodesic? The geodesic's weight. The geodesic's weight is this maximum, where x is over the entire interval. Okay. So, well, again, in the exit time result, we had removed the large deviation type of thing, right? We had said that the exit does not happen above 1 minus epsilon n by 2. So even here, we do not really work with that setting right now. That setting, that part is very clear. Actually, you can just implicitly use the exit time result. Now we have good bounds for the exit time. So we can just say that the geodesic is not going to be very far, but just by using that exit time result. So, again, you dispense with the large exit time case. So that, and we won't talk about that because it is really very simple. And this one is the really bulk of the argument. So we have to handle this quantity now. What is the probability that the maximum over this interval is larger by yn raised to 1/3? Okay, I think there is yes. Sorry, there has to be an n plus here. Right. Yeah. Sorry for that. Yeah. There has to be an n plus here. There is an error here, but that's fine. It has to be larger than its typical value. Yeah. Okay. So what do we have now? So recall the following. Just recall this notation which we had earlier. What is the this WR is this point, Rn is to 2/3, 0 here. Okay. Now for what do we want to show? Well, we already know that the expected passage time of a path exiting here, that has a quadratic fall-in mean, right? We did a mean calculation. So we know that the fall-in mean is x square over n, and x is this thing. So it's falling in r square n is to 1/3. So basically we have to do this kind of estimate, and here you have something with mean n minus r square n raised to 1/3, and here you have n plus y n raised to 1/3. Okay, so you have to sort of exceed your mean by r square plus y n raised to 1/3. So I mean, notice that we have already done this exact calculation earlier. Earlier we did this calculation, right? Here this thing had mean n minus r square 1 n raised to 1/3. So you had to overshoot your mean by of the order r square n raised to 1/3. And here the situation is just the same, but you have to overshoot your mean by r square plus y n raised to 1/3. Okay, so you just do the exact same thing. The exact same argument will give you sort of that this thing has this estimate once you have restricted to this part. Okay, once you are just maximizing over this part, and then you just do the same thing. You do a union bound, because I mean you are interested in the probability that you are interested in bounding over the entire range minus n by 4 to n by 4, right? We just cut it up into lots of pieces of n raised to 2/3, and you just do the same argument. Well, again, the point to line estimate will work directly because we have dispensed with the large deviation kind of case. So yeah, so the all these parallelogram kind of lines will have slopes which are not close to horizontal or vertical, right? So you will get this estimate, and now you just sum over all r, and I mean r corresponds to the interval that you are using. You just sum over all r possible minus infinity to plus infinity, and I mean you immediately see that you get this kind of bound. So this finishes the proof for the upper tail, and the proof technique was very similar to the one used for the exit time. Okay, now we come to the lower bound, and again in the lower bound also, I mean this is the result that we will show. One thing is that in the lower bound also, one bound is very simple. Again, by the deterministic kind of inequality. Again, I mean G stat Bn is at least this thing. So, and you have good upper bounds for good lower tail upper bounds for the exponential last passage population passage time, right? So you just use them, and you get a good upper bound for this. That much is fine. That much is very easy. But now we come to the difficult part, which is more involved, where you have to get the lower bound. So here what we will use, we'll use this estimate which I was recalling just now, where this estimate, the lower tail estimate for the point to line passage times in exponential last passage population, right? The one discovered in 2019. So we will use this estimate, and we will use it to obtain the lower tail for the stationary passage time. Yeah, so I mean, it is not very clear how you would do that, because in the stationary model you have exponential 1 minus rho and exponential rho. I mean, okay, one thing that I should point out is that here we actually only do it for rho equal to half. That our technique does not work for any other rho in this setting. So in the stationary model, you will have exponential half on the coordinate axis and exponential 1 in between, and this thing seems to be completely in the setting of exponential last passage population, whether exponential 1 weights, right? So it's not very clear how one could utilize this bound. So yeah, let's just come to that. So I mean, to do that, actually we'll have to construct a different version of this, different representation of the stationary model, which will sort of be more convenient in this setup. So to construct such a version, we have to look more deeply into into the stationary model itself. Okay, so I recall how the stationary model was constructed. I mean, it was corresponding to this CASEP, where you had a particle at 0, a hole at 0, and Bernoulli rho everywhere else. Okay, and I had said that the motions of the particle P0, by the Berg property, they move according to a Poisson process of exponential 1 minus rho increments. Okay, well, this is the property, a technical thing which will be used. And what does this say? First, in the setting of last passage, stationary last passage, this kind of Berg property which I had said, it indicated that your increments along the boundary directions are exponential 1 minus rho and exponential rho. But what this property says, I mean, first of all, it says that if you take any downright path, then the increments of the passage time along that downright path are, for vertical increments, are exponential 1 minus rho, and the vertical are exponential rho, and the horizontal increments are exponential 1 minus rho, and they are all independent. Okay, so well, intuitively, we know this result when your down right path is the coordinate axis, x-axis or the y-axis. That was because of the motion of particle p0. And well, intuitively, you could presume that this should hold for all horizontal, all vertical paths also, right? Because say, I mean, we only did this coordinate axis, but if you do say this path, then the increments along this path correspond to the motion of particle p1 in the correspondence. And I mean, it should also sort of, because I mean, this thing looks roughly symmetric. So particle p0 is directly seeing a system of stationary queues in tandem, but particle p1 should also somehow see a queues, system of stationary queues, right? So I mean, it's not a perfect explanation, but whatever intuition I could give. So this thing generalizes all down right path instead of just the vertical or horizontal paths, and this is kind of the thing which we will be using. Yeah, this is kind of technical property, but one thing I would like to tell you about just from this property is that this gives you sort of stationarity of increments directly in the stationary last passage model, which sort of is reminiscent of the stationarity of the Tasser. So what do I mean? Okay, so basically just come look at this. Okay, if you look at this, what do I mean here? What is GX-stat? Basically, by GX-stat, I mean you start a stationary LPB process with X as the origin. So here you put your exponential row weights, and here your exponential 1 minus row weights. And GX-stat Z is the passage time for this process to Z. So I'm saying the following. I'm saying if you do GX-stat for any point Y, say here, and to subtract off GX-stat Z, then whatever is remaining is distributed according to a stationary last passage percolation process started with Z as the origin. I mean, it is distributed the same. So actually, it's not just a distributional equality. We also have an explicit, very nice coupling. Let me come to the coupling between these two processes. First of all, you start a stationary last passage percolation process with X as the origin. Now, what do? Now, you look at passage times for this process on the lines, on these two lines. These two lines also have points, right? So they will have associated passage times. Okay, so on this vertical line, you place the increments of this passage time. I mean, so the weight of a point here is the is GX-stat of that point minus the GX-stat of the point just below. And on this horizontal line, the weight of a point here is the GX-stat passage time to that point minus the GX-stat passage time to the point just to the left of it. Okay. Yeah. So we have, so this is a primal model, and we use it to put weights on these axes. Now we will use these weights to construct a stationary model on this quadrant. How do we do that? Well, you just do your usual stationary last passage percolation model. You use the same exponential 1 weights here which you used for this X, and for and these the exponential and the weights here come from these increments, as I told. And well, we want the increments here to be exponential rho and here to be exponential 1 minus rho, right? Why is that? That's just because of this Stromberg property, because this thing itself is a downright path. Okay, right. So this thing will have the same distribution as this. Why does this equality hold? Now this thing is very simple. Well, what is A here? So I'm looking at the best path from X to Y, and the best path is touching this coordinate system at some point A. So what is A? Well, A is the unique point which maximizes this kind of thing, right? If you have this kind of path, its passage time will be the stationary passage time from X to A plus the passage time from A to Y, and A will vary across this coordinate system to maximize find A for which it is maximized. Or equivalently, I mean, this kind of thing, this kind of term will be this term where A is varied across here, and you choose the A for which it is maximum. Basically, you are sort of maximizing this term, right? This whole term. So basically, and what is G-stat A minus G-stat Z? Well, it is basically the sum of these increments IEX from here to is very evident from this that this maximization is the same as maximizing the corresponding LPP model here, right? So the point is that using a primal model here, okay. So now we will construct different LPP model using similar techniques. One thing I would like to point out is that here we constructed a model here with a substrate of this V-shaped thing, right? The usual V-shaped thing, and the Berg property actually goes for any downright path. So in principle, instead of taking here to be the coordinate axis, we could have taken any downright path here and use the primal model here to construct a stationary model with that as the substrate, and that is something which now. Okay. Right. So what happens now? So we are going to construct minus n. You put comma n as the origin. Use its increments to produce a stationary model here in this manner. Right. Now I'm saying that instead of taking the downright part to be this, you take the downright part to be this y equal to x line. I mean, it's some sort of jagged downright path, right? It's a line in the discrete setting, so it's a step to down, a step to the right. I mean, it's sort of a thing like this. This will be your line if you look at it properly. Okay, so what do we have to do? The same correspondence goes through. So basically, we have to first figure out the increments along this line, right? We first figure out the increments along this line. Recall that we are in the setting rho equal to half, and on this line, on this line for each, like the line has this kind of stuff. So each vertical increment will give you a minus exponential half increment, and each horizontal increment that will give you a plus exponential half increment, right? So each increment on the line, which is this, will be a difference of 2 of the model. So what is the new version of the stationary model? Well, basically, if you want to consider the stationary model from 0 to n, you do this. Instead of this V-shaped thing, you have this line. On this line, you have independent exponential half minus exponential half, this kind of weights. And you look at paths from 0 to n, comma n, which do this. So first they travel along the line, and then at some point they exit. And once they exit, they take an upright path to their destination n, comma n. Okay. And while traveling on the line, they accumulate the sum of all these k weights. So they accumulate this t kind of term. And once they exit, you just compute the last passage time from the point they exit. And the sum of these two is the weight of that path. And you maximize over all exits. So this is the corresponding stationary model from stationary model now. And notice now that we have succeeded in bringing the line into the picture, because we had lower tail lower bound bounds for the line to point passage time, right? But here, one thing is different is that you also have this kind of terms on the boundary. Okay, so notice one thing. I mean, this is very similar to this kind of model which we are used to, right, in the stationary population setting. There also same thing happens, that geodesic first spends some time on the boundary accumulating weights and then immediately exits and takes the bulk weight. So there we showed that the exit time, probability of exit time being larger than r in suitable scaling, that is bounded by e⁻⁻ r cube. So here also the same calculation, the same result, actually you can use that result to use that result here. And a version of the result will state that the probability of the geodesic from 0 to n exiting after x n raised to 2/3, that's bounded by e⁻⁻ x cube. Right, so this will be important in the next slide. So now let's finish the proof and go to the lower tail, lower bound. As we said, this only works for rho equal to half. And why is that? I mean, that is just because here you had these random variables, right? This xi minus yi. We use that rho equal to half to show that the mean is 0. And if rho is not equal to half, then the mean won't be 0. Okay. Right, one thing I forgot to say is that this G0 stat bar, this bar thing I'm using for the stationary model in a different one, equivalent representation. The representation with this line is y equal to x line. Okay, what do we need to bound? We need to give a lower bound for the probability that the stationary passage time is small. Okay, what is the stationary passage time? Well, you have to maximize over all exits on the boundary, and the exit, I mean, the coordinate of exit I took to be t. This, I mean, this t is varying across this boundary, right? Okay, so you want to get a lower bound for this kind of term. Now, by the exit time result, I just told you that the exits, if you are looking at the exit till time t, its probability is upper bounded by e raised to minus y cube. So while exit time thing, we can sort of restrict to not looking at all t, but only looking at t inside this interval. So what that exit time result will say, that the probability that the geodesic exits outside this interval, that is at most e raised to minus y square is cube. So e raised to minus y raised to 6. And notice that we are trying to get an e raised to minus y cube lower bound for this, right? So this thing will be very, very small, and so we just ignore it. So we need to just bound this. We need to just bound for small exit times. Okay, so how do we do that now? We have to get a lower bound for this probability. Okay, so you have a maximum thing, right? So the probability that the maximum is small, well, for the maximum to be small, it is sufficient to demand that each of the individual things maximum be small. And now how do you, I mean, separate them into two different probabilities? You do that just because of independence, right? Because this T of t, this thing is going across on the boundary. This thing is the weight collected by the geodesic on the boundary, right? On this boundary. So this concerns itself, I mean, it's concerned only with the boundary, the exponential half minus exponential half variables on the boundary. So, and this other term, this thing is dependent only on the bulk weights. It's the part which comes after you exit the y equal to x line. So this is in the bulk, and bulk weights are independent of the boundary weights just by construction. So this probability factors out. Now we get an opportunity to use the point to line estimate. How do we do that? Well, you just look at this term. What is this term? This is the best, I mean, this is the best path from the, this is lower bounded by the best path from the line x equal to y to n comma n being small, or vn being small, right? Because we are in the bulk now, and so we are in the exponential last passage population setting. So using that kind of lower bound, which already is known, like line to point lower bound, you get an e raised to minus y cube for this term. Now, where is this constant coming from? That constant is coming from this term actually. What is this term? Actually, this is very simple. This is again a random walk thing. And what is happening here? So basically, this T of t is some sum of exponential random variables, exponential half minus exponential half random variables till point t, right? So what are you doing? Yeah, so if you look at it closely, this is sort of a probability that the Brownian motion, say between points minus 1, 1, the probability that the maximum of a Brownian motion is upper bounded by some constant thing, say minus half. Why? Because you look at this y square n raised to 2/3. This is, I mean, if you take the square root of this to get the standard deviation of the random walk, you'll see you get a y n raised to 1/3 term, right? So and you can just use the Brownian motion result to show that, I mean, and you have y and n are large, right? You can just use the Brownian motion result and get a constant lower bound for it. Okay, so this is how the lower bound works. Okay, so yeah, we are done with the proofs, and I will just like to end by making some remarks. So how did we proceed? So we basically utilized all the random matrix estimates which were coming from the connection for the exponential last passage population. We had a connection for the point-to-point last passage population, and for the point-to-line exit times as well. We used them, and that was what we used to give up bounds. Okay. And notice that our bounds really only use the point-to-point deviations, and also the that Taylor expansion thing, the x square by n fall in the mean, so the curvature of the limit shape. So we use that kind of thing here. So we expect that this will go through in other models where such things are known. So maybe stationary version of geometric and Poissonian last passage population. Also, maybe just a few words about the technique used by the other group. So they actually don't use the correspondence with the I mean, random matrix stuff at all. They instead just work with the stationary model, and there they use that downright path, that strong Burke property to get the exact formula for the log moment generating function of the stationary passage time, and they use that to give upper tail bounds for the upper bounds for the upper tail, and then you get the exit time bound as the corollary. Yeah, so yeah, that's what I wanted to say, and yeah, thank you for your attention. And yeah, if there are any questions, you can ask.
Okay. Questions? So I myself have one small question about that last remark you made, this Sepalainen and others. Are the results also only for the exponential special cases, or is it more general?
You mean the stationary? I didn't.
I mean, weight distributions.
Yeah.
Are they?
Oh yeah, it's for the stationary exponential last passage population model.
Okay.
And they use that Burke property kind of thing, right? So that's some very specialized sort of thing.
I see. Okay. Okay. Any other questions?
The random matrix estimates, they are there for even for other LPPs, right? Geometric or Poisson, other stationary LPP.
Yeah. So I mean, geometric LPP, you have that correspondence. I mean, because we get the exponential correspondence by taking limit.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
I think the geometric has the estimates are known for the geometric case and the Poissonian case also, as far as I know. Yeah.
Okay.
So I have one more. So this stationary one is not like there is a modification of the random matrix model which can give it for the stationary model. Is there?
Yeah, I think there is no such correspondence known. So there is no there is no correspondence with stationary passage times with any random matrix thing known till now, as far as I know.
Okay. I see. Okay, all right. So if there are no other questions, so maybe people can unmute themselves, and then we can thank Manan for his questions.